Hey everybody, Brian Von VA here. Guess what? Everybody knows the age-old saying, you remember your first. Well, today we're going to be talking about who was your first D&D character. My first character was honestly just an amalgamation of my characteristics. The Gloomstalker Ranger named Ram, pronounced Ram, Lobo. Basically, his village was an outcast society that had a particularly unique magic. Their rite of passage and coming-of-age ritual was to slay one of the many great beasts in the area, bring the body back, and the shaman would infuse that animal's spirit into a piece of armor that was to never be removed. The armor gave them special abilities. Ram never got the chance as his village was attacked by orcs, classic tragic backstory, and his only parent, his father, was nowhere to be found. All he found of his father was his wolf mask. He took it as his own and began to search for his father. I was obviously new and didn't know what I was doing. So I came up with a really cool idea, and my DM said no magic items for level 1 characters. But he kept the core concept of the tribe and told me that Shifter was a great choice of race for what I really wanted to do. He excelled at 2 things. Shooting enemies with a bow was one of those things. But the thing he was an absolute best at, rolling nat 1s against enemies, ended up shooting his allies and rolling max damage, with the sharpshooter feat. The best thing that I did with this character was my use of rope trick, creating pocket dimensions that you can climb up into and see out of. Well, we had a barbarian, a half-orc named Brog. I used rope trick. He climbed up. I tied the bottom end to one of my arrows and began creeping my way through the dungeon while my entire party sat inside the pocket dimension. I came across a beholder and shot my arrow. Didn't roll with sharpshooter, so I'd be able to hit, and what do you know? Nat 20. I hit the center eye of the beholder, and the barbarian jumps out and crits his attack as well. The beholder ended up dying to the bard's cutting words. We called it the Brog Delivery System, or BDSM for short. That actually made me choke a bit. I had a lot of fun. I was going through a pretty bad divorce at the time, so he became my whole attention to distract me from the real-life situations I was going through. Honestly, probably wouldn't have gotten so involved in D&D otherwise. Hey, I'm sorry for the divorce, but I'm glad you had something to get you through it. Before we continue with the video, let's talk about the Eternium. These fantasy playing cards are a clash of titanic elements such as sea monsters combined with the beauty and power of fire, or the horrors of the undead fused with medieval punk styles. These playing cards are printed on a high-quality 310-gram blackcore paper with artwork done by the amazing Eddie Whipple. You have 3 mystical decks to choose from: the Dawn, the Dusk, and dead center a fusion called the Twilight. These also feature your standard 2 to ace playing cards flavored within 4 unique fantasy races: the Bastions, the Restless, the Abyssals, and the Imperium. And by the way, there will only be 1,000 decks in production, not a single deck more. You can also purchase their limited edition coins too, which come in a variety of colors like bronze, copper, and silver, as well as the Black Noir coin, which will be limited to only 100 units and not a single unit more. With all of that said and done, if you're into dark fantasy like you've never seen before with beautiful artwork, check out the Eternium. Links are in the description below. I've played a lot of characters since I started playing 5th edition 6 years ago. But my very first character was Delkesh. I hadn't even planned on playing D&D. I was playing Arma 3 with a bunch of friends, and one day the server was down when we logged on due to our weekly mission. The guy who was running the server wasn't online, so we got bored and decided to do D&D on a whim. That's the way to do it. We ended up picking characters that day and playing the next day. Well, I didn't know anything about how D&D worked, so I figured the easiest way to get into the game would be to play something like myself, but in medieval times. I'm a decently smart guy when it comes to technology and such, so I wanted to play an intelligence-based class. At the time, the only things we had available to us were the standard classes from the SRD. The Artificer didn't exist in 5th edition at the time, so Wizard it was. We had such a great time in that first game. We got a little nuts with it and played basically every day because it was so new and exciting to all of us. We finished our first campaign in like 4 months, but we played the equivalent of a 3-year campaign of 4 to 5 hour weekly sessions in that time. Delkesh was reckless and arrogant until he realized that he was too powerful to be reckless with his abilities and he needed to do some good with them. That's when he started focusing more on utility and protection spells, things to keep the party from getting hurt, stuff like that. We made a lot of mistakes in that first campaign, but those characters are some of our favorites we've played. Envoy Tantrum. She was going to be a Pathfinder summoner, but it confused me, and I couldn't find a D&D summoner. At one point, my friend and DM lamented about never playing with a good bard, so I took it as a challenge. She was a 3.5 edition bard, neutral good, and was a huge fan of her deity, the blue flying moose. She accidentally became a bit of a brat, but she had a heart of gold and would do anything for her friends. Eventually, after saving the world and retiring alongside her friends as heroes, she died peacefully, while her friends became gods. Her campaign lasted 4 years and I went from level 1 to level 30. My first character, which is still my current character, is a tiefling barbarian named Diego. He's kinda homebrewed. He has black armor with huge spikes on it, 2 pet ravens named Durpo and Francois, and a large, poisonous toad named Hoppy. He has 3 daggers, a bone death scythe, a great axe, a shoulder cannon, 2 hand axes, a flaming dagger, and javelins. He's also only level 3. He's kinda overpowered, yeah. He's also Italian and has a wondrous mustache. He's also allergic to mushrooms. Feral Tiefling Blood Hunter. I know, cliched, I know, but he was fun. Unfortunately, I had a bad habit of putting down my rapier after I put my right on it. By the end of the campaign, I think I hurt myself more than the enemies did to me because of that habit. The chef feat was helpful though. The temp HP was always about what the average roll for my Hemocraft dice would be. Murphy O'Brien was my first character, a 3.5 edition barbarian. I kept it simple for my first time, so I went with a passable Irish accent I can manage, and played him as a big drunk. I had tons of fun. The campaign lasted 1 year and went to level 20, with a time skip where we went from level 12 to 20. He fought alongside his chief in the final battle against a devil-possessed fire giant, an ancient red dragon, and all of their backup caster minions. My first character was Grog, the gnome sorcerer. He worships a god of chaos and is quite the arsonist. He is chaotic neutral, by the way. Quite obviously, I have given him every fire spell available to him. Funnily enough, he is a gnome who dislikes the underground, and backstory reasons. Grog's favorite pastimes include melting orc faces, melting human faces, melting elf faces, and not melting dwarf faces. He also likes whacking stuff with hammers. Also, I can get behind this gnome because he likes killing everything but a good dwarf. I can stand by that. My first character was Naomi, a 3.5 ranger scout in an Eberron campaign. She was an archer that used Hank's energy bow from the 1980s D&D cartoon, which there are stats for. Best thing I remember doing with her was clearing out a fort by herself when a party member casts greater invisibility because scouts got bonus damage if they move at least 10 feet before attacking, and nobody could find what square I was in. She eventually became a half-fae and got wings so she could fly around, but that was about the time the game ended since the DM couldn't run anymore. Sad times, but it sounded like Naomi was really fun. Auburn Farion, a high elf wizard that was from a small library, made it into the biggest in the country. Also, invented a couple magical stuff that in the future are an everyday item to use. At level 1, he had 19 intelligence. Sadly, he wasn't as strong as he could have been because I didn't know what spells were good to use. Lord Oakwood Spruce Forest the 17th. That is 10, 5, and 2 2s, if anyone doesn't know. Keeper of the cube, maker of commitments that the party has to deal with, and he whose title progressively gets more complicated as the adventure progresses. A fighter wizard multiclass of noble origin who favored fire magic. The campaign didn't go for super long, but a good 6 sessions was plenty to make his title way too long. Hijikata, a Kenku druid that was infatuated with a spirit that saved his life when he was young, a spirit that he would later discover was Mother Nature herself. When Hijikata finally knew this, he pledged himself to her and made his mission to protect nature everywhere possible and at any cost. He's been successful thus far. Scipio, a 5th edition Beastmaster Ranger. He started off as an upbeat, snarky Belmont knockoff. Due to being very underpowered, he was eventually given a gun and an exploding deck of cards. Over the course of his journey, he made friends with his party, adopted Boris the Mouse, party goblin NPC, traveled through the hells, watched his wolf die in another dimension, watched his whole party die one by one while the city they swore to defend burned around them, was thrown into the past by a mage to try to save the future, only to find out that his past is an alternate past. He cannot save the future, and knows nothing of this new world. He is a paranoid, PTSD-suffering grump with one rule: no one touches the goblin. John, a hill dwarf great old one warlock. He loved fights and knowledge, but was hair trigger when he lost, causing him to become more obsessed with power. After my first campaign with him, I used him as the big bad evil guy for a bunch of level 20s because he was a level 20 warlock with 20 levels in every subclass. It was fun. Also, that sounds very OP. A human fighter named Rothmund, which, if you know how to translate a terrible butchering of the German language, means red shirt. I grew up watching Star Trek The Next Generation and assumed he would die very quickly. A tiefling warlock named Akari. Second session into the campaign, he got exploded by a boss and gained a magical scar that glows whenever he uses magic. In my edgy teen stage, I made a hobgoblin fighter named Arganzon. Arganzon? Wow, that's a really interesting name, actually. I had to repeat it. He was a mercenary leader, and I guess he liked money and intimidating commoners. At least he wasn't evil or chaotic evil. My first character was the King of Edgelords. Multi-class Drow, Ranger 3, Rogue 2, Fighter 4. That was as high as he got. We're talking evasion, 2-weapon fighting style, using a double scimitar with weapon specialization. Neutral evil because he's out for himself after escaping the tyrannical Drow matriarchy, seeking a domain to rule of his own. His name was Tebrin Vryn. Fun fact, I think the localization team for Final Fantasy Tactics used names from the Forgotten Realms Player's Guide because those names showed up as NPCs a lot. I saw a lot of Tebrins and Vryns in that game. Zephyr Jaren, Tiefling Rogue. While the rest of the party was all somewhere in their 20s, Zephyr was only 13. He was also a mute, and had a little notepad for anything he couldn't communicate with simple gestures. He was followed by a Protector ASMR PC who was tasked with ensuring his safety, and was entrusted with our Ranger's Direwolf in case anything happened to them. The other players said they loved his design too, which made little me very happy to hear. A human draconic sorcerer named Dragozo Ander. He ended up devolving into the Vegeta archetype quickly, right down to being one-shotted by the boss. Hey, don't do Vegeta that dirty. Winston, a tiefling trickery cleric with a criminal background. I later gave him 3 levels of rogue to give him more of that sneaky build. He grew up in the streets when his mother passed away. Winston met the love of his life, who was a part of a human cult and did human sacrificing. He also befriended a pirate drow who became his best friend. Both his best friend and his fiancée worshiped 2 different gods, and his best friend, well, didn't like that. Instead of being a chill dude, and just said, "It is what it is," the drow instead killed Winston's fiancée and had Winston framed for it. Winston vowed to work with any god that would save his life, and that's how he became in debt of Laera. Hey everybody, Brian Von VA here checking in after the vid. Please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment down below telling us about your very first D&D character. All the love everybody, we'll see you next time.